Check Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you from the Check News World Headquarters here in Victoria. Bit of a slow start to the legislative session, and then we had the budget, and the old legislature's picking up steam this past week. We're going to chat today about a bunch of new things, new bills on the issues of pay equity and intimate image sharing, plus a discussion about reforms in politics and the shifting position even of one party on the issue of decriminalization and safe supply. Thankfully, we have got the pod squad here to break it all down. Allie Blades, Kareem Allam, and Jeff Ferrier are here. Just a recap, Allie's with MASH Strategies, co-led the BC campaign for Pierre Poilievre. Kareem with Fairview Strategy ran Kevin Falcon's leadership campaign, Vancouver Mayor Ken Sims' ABC campaign, and Jeff Ferrier with Hill and Knowlton worked as a communications executive in the Ministry of Health during the pandemic. Thank you all for being here. We talked a couple shows ago about reforming BC's toxic political culture. You can catch that episode if you go back on our YouTube channel or your podcast provider, have a listen. This week, Premier David Eby announced he had asked Speaker Raj Chouhan to tackle this issue, try and make politics a more inclusive space, particularly for women and diverse politicians. The announcement came on International Women's Day, but more importantly, comes after a couple weeks after Melanie Mark resigned in BC politics, and we talked about that. She likened politics to a torture chamber and political debate to character assassination. So we add in the fact that actually Question Period celebrated its 50th anniversary this past week, a daily fixture here where people yell and scream at each other. It's been around since 1973, later in our parliamentary system, federally and overseas, obviously. Tying this all together, we have a premier handing this over to the speaker. We have Question Period, whether it functions or not. We have larger reforms. Allie, let's start with you. Where are we on this issue? We keep talking about it. And Question Period, the speaker, what should we be looking at here?
So to one of your points, in order to get more people involved in the political process, more women involved in the political process, we have to fix whatever it is that Question Period is right now, because it's actually misnamed. There are questions, certainly, but it's more Accusation Period. And so the Toronto Star did this thing in 2018. It was an interactive article where they classified Question Period in a few categories. It was highlighting what was said that was actually true, what was false, what was a stretch, and who dodged certain questions. And they had 5 reporters on it, and it was brilliant because there's actually very little truth to what they were saying, and a lot of politicians dodging these questions. And wouldn't it be nice if the new system had a bit of a fact checker, so that people understood that what politicians are trying to do is create points that fit their own narrative, not necessarily standing up for what's accurate. It's supposed to be a space where MLAs stand up for their community and stand up for their portfolios, but that's not really the case right now.
No, the old line, it's called Question Period, not Answer Period, and now it's Accusation Period. You're right. There's not a lot of exchange. There's a lot of outrage, a lot of clipping for social media, a lot of use for your promotional materials, but not a kind of back and forth. Jeff, what do you think?
Well, first of all, on the speaker having the opportunity to show us the way forward on how to do things better in the legislature, a lot of respect for Raj Chouhan, but let's remember that this is the fellow, when we asked for a legislature cat, brought us a stuffed cat.
That's true.
So I hope that with whatever they're bringing forward,
you can't trust him to fix BC politics. Where's the cat, Raj? Where's the cat?
But whatever we're doing, let's get some actual life to this discussion. I agree with Allie. I think that Question Period is hurting public engagement and public involvement in British Columbia. I wish everyone would just stop fighting. I think it's hurting, good people who want to do good things for their communities. It's not a debate. I'd love for there to be a debate, but it's not a debate. It's theater. It's really bad theater. It's people making accusations based on things that they know often to be not accurate, but they see it as in their political interest, and government often dodging responses and pointing to things that happened 16 years ago. And then in all of this, at the end of the day, for the ordinary person at home, is there any new information or insight or commitment to action that comes out of any of this? Like nothing.
Yeah. Kareem, what do you make of all this?
Just riffing off of your comment, yes, it's question period, not answer period. I think one of the challenges that the speaker is going to find as he starts to dig into this issue is our system is deeply rooted in precedents and history, and the system of our government requires the opposition to be the opposition. It's an oppositional form of government, and the guardrails on how much the opposition can in fact be an opposition is as long as it remains loyal to the Queen. That's why it's Her Majesty's loyal opposition in Ottawa. It's that oppositional nature, I think, that creates that framework for where we've ended up today. But it's also in part tied to the media. Opposition parties have a really hard time getting coverage. And so the more sensational they can make something, the more the media will cover that issue. You know, if the media all got together, and this isn't about blaming the media, but if all the media got together and said, okay, we're going to stop covering some of these more sensational, bombastic things that occur, all it takes is one bad actor, a Fox News, to all of a sudden come out and break ranks with the rest of their media friends. And all of a sudden you're back to square one. You know, it's frustrating when you see legislatures around the world that don't have this British parliamentary system, where you see a lot more cross-aisle, more bipartisanship, more bipartisan efforts coming across. There's something that does need to be sort of looked at in terms of how can an opposition do its role, do it effectively, but without itself being caustic, but also at the same time to the government deliberately frustrating the political process by dodging questions, avoiding the opportunity to be accountable. Question period, if done right, is an important tool for accountability, but right now it's not being done right. But I'm not too optimistic about what the speaker is going to be able to come back with in terms of recommendations. Sure, we can strengthen the code of conduct guidelines. Sure, the speaker can jump in more when he feels certain thresholds are being crossed in terms of decorum. But beyond that, I'm not really sure what this is going to come back and that it's going to yield a better result. I'd spend more time, if I were the speaker, looking at what happens more behind the cameras in the legislature, how MLAs, staff, the press gallery interact with each other off hours. I think that there's certainly potential, a lot of issues there that have been brought up in the past as well, that I think we need more rigor around code of conduct, and if we go to address those things, I think that will have a spillover effect to having more productive question periods.
Mm-hmm. The problem is it's sort of that, and I totally agree with you that that's where it has to start, but that it exceeds the mandate of the speaker. And I guess I'm a little bit disappointed that the premier punted this off to the speaker, because it abdicates a bit of the leadership position he promised to listen and act in the wake of Mark's resignation. And you know, it has to come from the party leaders, I think. It can't come from the speaker's office. They have to set the tone through their staff, through everyone else, through their MLAs, through their caucus, that they want something different. Otherwise, we're just kind of fiddling at the edges here, I think. But, you know, Kevin Falcon this week, you know, we asked him if he wanted to participate, and he said, well, sure, but, you know, we tried this, he says, in the early 2000s when the NDP were down to 2 MLAs in opposition, and it didn't go well because the oppositional nature means you need to show outrage as part of opposing the government. And eliminating that from question period leaves you with nothing. And I think where we're headed here is the speaker's going to come back and crack down on heckling. And the end result of that is going to be we have to sit in the legislature in dead silence and listen to people lie. And that doesn't help. It doesn't help to listen to government not answer the question in silence. That doesn't fix the problem of not answering the question, or the question being completely inaccurate, or the whole. We just have to sit there and take it in silence. And I don't think that is a solution at all. But I have this worry we might be heading in that direction. Jeff?
Yeah, I think that in terms of getting things done on what happens in the legislature, it's going to be up to voters. They're going to need to hold the different parties accountable for their role in making or not making the legislature work. I saw one really good example, I thought, in question period this week of an MLA doing a good job, and it was Adam Olson, who asked a question of the government about, it was very simple. It was, will you help my local community fund a fire hall for the local community? And the minister got up without shouting and said, this is a really important issue. We've got to figure this out. And that's a real contrast to the kind of back and forth that we see between government and opposition, where the one side is talking about 16 years in government and the other party's questions amount to, will you admit that you're a failure? And I think that if, MLAs and all parties, whether it's government in answering or it's opposition and how they formulate questions, are more constructive, and not only will they get better information and results for their constituents, hopefully voters will see that and reward people who are behaving constructively and making the institutions work.
It's just so far down the list of voter priorities. I can't imagine anyone ever voting on this issue. They have given up thinking that the legislature
number two
can
for
change.
me. It's potholes and Main Island is one, and this is number two for me. So
Right, and then stuffed cat. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, ultimately,
Yes.
the accountability comes through voters. It just feels like if they could get all of the leaders in a room with an ordinary panel of voters, they'd want them to do this. But there's no long-term gain for any of the parties to change their short-term strategies to attack each other, because they're all facing an election next year. So it's only going to get worse. This is one of the worst couple of weeks I've seen in the legislature in a while. It was just a gong show on some days. So, and full credit to the BC Greens, especially leader Sonia Furstenau, who's pushing this behind the scenes. She wrote a letter to Eby. She pinned him down in person on this issue. She wanted to get a meeting of her, Kevin Falcon, and Eby in a room together. They don't want to do it. She wants to do it. So kudos to her on that. So let's move on, though, to another topic here, which is a number of bills that landed in the legislature coinciding with International Women's Day, which is part of the reason we were talking about the earlier topic of toxicity, because David Eby was asked about toxicity on International Women's Day. But the government had built a whole week of themes around this. There was a bill that requires companies to provide more information about the pay gap between men and women, and another bill that will give more tools to people who have intimate images of them shared online without their consent. Plus, there was a release of all of what is covered under the government's new free prescription contraception program. Kareem, you've been doing some interesting polling around the issue of women in politics and what they're looking for from their leaders that maybe puts a bit of perspective on this. Walk us through it.
Yeah, for the last 3-4 years, when we've been polling at Fairview Strategy, we have a good slate of political clients right across the country, federally, provincially, municipally. And we've seen this trend where the largest group of undecided voters has now become women. Our viewpoint, based on the research that we've done, is that women aren't seeing themselves reflected in the political parties that represent them. They're not seeing themselves in the leaders and the policies that are coming out from those political parties. So in the last municipal election in Vancouver, for example, we were seeing 67% of undecided voters were women. And we've seen that trend again federally and provincially in our research. So on this International Women's Day, I do suspect that the NDP has been seeing this pattern emerge and is going after and doing exactly what that undecided voter wants, which is movement on the systemic issues that are continue to be challenges for women. I do think that these issues, these policy announcements, will sell very, very well in the public. I think they're meaningful first steps. I think if we were going to be critical of them, it's that they're just that, they're first steps, and we're not really still going right at the heart of these systemic issues. But I see this package of policy around announcements around International Women's Day playing out very, very well. And I think it's up to the BC Liberals now to come up in the same way they did with their mental health announcement, by going and driving right at the heart of this problem, this solution, with a solution.
Yeah, no, they're very interesting bills. They maybe come up a little bit short of what the advocates in the different areas had wanted, but they are work in progress, and they are probably all going to attract all party support. Allie, what did you think?
One, I take issue with the fact that all of these were announced because it was International Women's Day this week. These should be, to Kareem's point, a good start, but continued efforts week after week after week, month, and year after year. But here we are, all of the women announcements this week. Every year, we all get together and we talk about, well, how do women get ahead? These legislations, they're in that right direction. I mean, ultimately, women just want, they have a desire to take control of their own future. And when it comes to the contraceptive piece, like, this is hundreds of dollars as well that women are saving year after year. I mean, financial support is important, but then there's another layer to that policy piece. So Nikki Hill chairs the Period Poverty Task Force that was initiative by the provincial government. And this is a big win for them. For some women in this province, access to these resources is going to be a game changer for them in career success and confidence. So, great first step. But I want to continue to hear about this beyond our special week.
Mm-hmm. And it is interesting because the prescription contraception issue has been promised by the NDP a while ago, and it's taken a long time to get there. And then the non-consensual intimate images issue the government's been working on for several years, but you're right, they were kind of held off to be announced this week. Period Promise and the Period Poverty Campaign, I've written quite a bit about, a big supporter of that. And I asked David Eby in front of his women's panel, I said, why did you just give BC Ferries $500 million and they're still charging $1 for women's products in the bathroom? Can't you use some of this money? You're blowing out the space lock door all over the place to advocate and advance some of the other issues, and not just on International Women's Day. And the government kind of is dodging that as well. But it's too bad, you're right, that this all gets shoehorned into a week and then we stop talking about it again, because they are worthwhile initiatives that should be pushed for the rest of the year as well. Jeff, let's bring you in.
I will note that the kind of focus that we're seeing on gender equality and gender justice, gender economic issues is a kind of thing. It's been a big shift since 2001. We actually had pay equity legislation back then, but it became controversial, and it was voted out a long time ago. And now we're having all parties in the legislature come forward this week with some good ideas on how to make gains in this area. And it's what happens when you have more women in decision-making responsibilities. The government has a gender-balanced cabinet. It's the result largely of efforts that the NDP was criticized for around affirmative action in the party. Now all of the parties are putting a real push on attracting more women to politics, which is a good thing, and commend them all for that. One piece of legislation we didn't talk about this week that I thought was good, and it's on these issues. It's Sonia Furstenau's NDA Disclosure Act. It gets at the issue of institutions that use non-disclosure agreements to silence women who are victims of harassment in the workplace. I think if you look around at British Columbia institutions, it's kind of like on this issue, it's kind of like when you forget your lunch in your backpack, and you look at it 3 weeks later, and it becomes a festering awfulness. And I think that there's a lot of festering awfulness in workplaces across BC on this issue. So 2 times in the show, I'm commending the BC Greens for bringing forward good policy ideas that are worth debating. And but agree with Allie wholeheartedly on this. Can't just be this week. It's got to be matters that we debate all through the year as issues of fundamental justice and fairness.
I will just say on the original pay equity law that the NDP brought in 2001, when I went back and read about it, it wasn't very good. All it did is allow you to go to the Human Rights Commissioner, which existed at the time, and complain. And I think the New Democrats have kind of, maybe they're misleading people by thinking that we have jumped forward from that. Here we are 23 years later, and there's a bill that allows you to go complain if you see a lack of gender equity. So I'm not sure we really advanced very much, and I don't think the original bill was very good. One of the other problems, Allie, is that businesses aren't required to really report any of this data for as many as 3 years from now, which was a compromise the NDP made with the business community that said we don't want to do this, and it's extra work for us. So the government gave them this 3-year runway depending on how many employees they have. So they don't even gonna, and it's voluntary. So it will require people to be honest, men and women, about what they're getting paid, and so the data may not even be complete. So now we've got this weird 3-year runway before we get the data we need to start deciding whether we should have just put in place some type of enforcement or mandate through this bill in the first place.
Yeah, do you know how much lost salary one would have within a 3-year span? It's ridiculous. I was with a group of young women this week, and one recent UBC grad told me something that I think was just spot on. She said a lot of the stats and figures and everything that she's reading on affordability for Vancouver, it's with a dual income. She just wants to live in a world where she has the financial independence to do it on her own. She doesn't want to have to rely on anybody else except for her own grit, that she will be able to survive in BC after graduation. And so everything that we're talking about here is really to get to that point. I could go on about, the independent woman piece, but that's what young people are worried about right now, is that they're going to have to rely on someone else in order to survive. And that's just, it's really cruel.
Okay, good discussion. Thank you, panel, for being here. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with all the latest here on Political Capital.